From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. British cruise ship the MS Braemar docked in Cuba on Wednesday after the country offered a humanitarian response to the plight of the passengers aboard the ship. The ship arrived at Mariel Port early in the morning this Tuesday, and passengers leaving the ship were accompanied by medical personnel in protective gear to Jose Marti International Airport to board flights back to the UK. The mainly British passengers had been confined to the ship for days after a number of Caribbean countries, including the Bahamas and Barbados, refused to let them dock, given COVID-19 fears. Most of the 682 passengers are expected to arrive in London on Thursday morning on planes chartered by Fred Olsen Cruise Lines, while passengers showing coronavirus or flu-like symptoms were being flown to a British military base on a separate plane. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab expressed gratitude to the Cuban government for swiftly enabling this operation and for its close cooperation to make sure it was successful. And while Cuba continues to increase preventative health measures, it also reported its first death due to the novel coronavirus on Wednesday. The victim was a 61-year-old Italian citizen. Island authorities reported that despite the efforts made by the health team, the patient developed complications that led to his death. Likewise, the molecular biology laboratory of the central province of Villa Clara confirmed 3 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, bringing the total to 10. Cuba has 389 people currently hospitalized and under observation, having been identified as possible cases. Workers at Cuban borders have been trained to protect themselves to prevent the virus from spreading further. The Colombian Health Ministry stated on Wednesday that the number of coronavirus cases in the country has risen to 93. Colombia declared a state of emergency after it reported its first COVID-19 death on Tuesday as the global pandemic began to grip South America. President Ivan Duque said the international airport will continue to operate to facilitate the return of Colombian citizens. The measure dismisses the warnings issued by the World Health Organization that docks, airports and border checkpoints are hotspots for coronavirus contagion. According to the Comptroller General of the Republic of Colombia, the country's airports do not have enough medical personnel and more than 70% have no protocol for international travellers. Among the new measures adopted by the Duque government in the face of the outbreak is the free distribution of water to at least 1 million people, as well as the preventative isolation of people aged over 70. Chile declared a 90-day state of catastrophe on Wednesday to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus in the country, where there are currently 238 confirmed cases.
The state of constitutional emergency makes it possible to implement a series of measures, including restricting meetings in public spaces, avoiding large gatherings, ensuring the distribution of basic goods and services, ordering the creation of food reserves and other goods necessary for the care and subsistence of the people, establishing quarantines or curfews, issuing measures for the protection of services of public utilities, and limiting the transit or movement of persons.
Authorities in Martinique have announced restrictions on international flights from Wednesday due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Martinique's government established a limited time for hundreds of tourists currently located on the island to return to their home countries as a preventative measure to stop the spread of the novel coronavirus. The flight restrictions relate to European nations where thousands of cases have been reported, as well as neighbouring Guadeloupe and Dominica. There are now over 850 confirmed cases of COVID-19 across the Latin American region. Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Uruguay and Chile have reported a significant increase in cases, which led governments to announce new measures to halt the spread of the disease. Bolivia declared a state of emergency on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Argentina closed its borders for 15 days to non-residents after declaring Bolivia and Chile as risk zones due to the number of COVID-19 cases in these neighbouring countries. Mexico informed on Tuesday that the number of cases there had risen to 93 in the past 24 hours. Uruguay has also reported at least 50 confirmed cases. Brazil also reported an alarming rise in the number of cases at a faster rate than in Italy. The World Health Organization has warned that Brazil might not have a realistic approach regarding the potential impact of the novel coronavirus. The European Union announced a decision on Tuesday to implement a 30-day restriction on non-essential travel, and at least 12 countries have re-erected border checkpoints to stem the flow of people and goods. The World Health Organization has described the coronavirus pandemic as the defining global health crisis of our time, while the number of cases worldwide has tipped over the 200,000 mark, according to Johns Hopkins University. Meanwhile, in Lombardy, Italy, 319 people died in a single day. On Tuesday, Italy's death toll surpassed 2,500, while the total number of cases rose to over 31,000. Belgium has joined the list of European nations imposing strict restrictions. Meanwhile, Germany has reported 8,200 cases, with a rise of 1,000 in the last 24 hours. The Spanish Ministry of Health reported almost 14,000 positive cases, 623 deaths, and over 1,000 recovered patients. And in the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson's government has been widely criticised due to its minimal response to the novel coronavirus outbreak, although it has just been reported that schools are due to shut from Friday until further notice. Our correspondent there, Pablo Navarrete, brings us more details.
Desde Londres, muy buenos días a todos los televidentes de Telesur.
Good morning from London to all Telesur viewers. On Tuesday, the government of Boris Johnson called on the British population to try to avoid international travel in what appears to be a change of strategy on how to deal with the coronavirus in the United Kingdom. Until now, the government has been heavily criticized by groups of scientists and other members of the British society for a strategy that ultimately favored economic factors at the cost of the country's most vulnerable sectors.
Los factores económicos al costo de los sectores más vulnerables del país. En esencia, el gobierno no estaba.
In essence, the government was not adopting as strict measures as in other European countries and others around the world. Schools remain open despite trade unions and teachers calling on the government to close schools. But yesterday, Boris Johnson appears to have changed the strategy after a report from the Imperial College of the University of London was published, noting that by following the new government strategy, the death toll could reach 250,000 instead of 500,000 if the government were to do nothing.
Podría llegar a 260,000 en vez de medio millón, que sería el número sin que el gobierno hiciera nada.
The government has called on the population to avoid all non-essential contact with other people and not to leave their homes, although many public spaces remain open and have been heavily criticized on Twitter by doctors and the population, since there's no policy to check whether someone has the coronavirus or is showing any symptoms.
Ya que no hay una política de poder ver si uno tiene coronavirus y tiene los síntomas.
The National Health Service is flooded with people asking what to do. Right now, if there is someone in a home who has symptoms, the whole family has to be quarantined for 14 days. As of Tuesday 9 a.m. local time, 1,950 coronavirus cases had been reported, but as I have already mentioned, there is no system that is widely registering people with symptoms among the population.
1,950 casos de coronavirus, pero como ya he dicho, no hay un sistema que esté.
As such, this number is certainly likely to be much higher. Only a little over 50,000 people had been tested for coronavirus, and until yesterday, 71 people had died due to the virus.
Para ver si tenían coronavirus y hasta ayer se habían registrado 71.
The Boris Johnson government seems to have changed its strategy a little, which has been strongly criticized, and has called for a kind of social Darwinism that seems to favor economic factors at the expense of the most vulnerable sectors of society. We will continue to report on all developments here. Back to you in the studio.
Informando todo lo que ocurre, ahora de vuelta al estudio.
There are now more than 400 confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus across the African continent, with a number of countries imposing a range of prevention and containment measures against the spread of the pandemic. Burkina Faso announced its first death on Wednesday, which is also the first known fatality in sub-Saharan Africa. The country now has 26 confirmed cases, with over 230 contacts being monitored. Other African countries that have reported fatalities include Egypt, Morocco, Algeria and Sudan. Likewise, Djibouti's foreign minister confirmed the country's first coronavirus case as a member of a Spanish military contingent that entered the country recently. Ethiopia and Somalia have also reported cases, while Nigeria has issued a travel ban on citizens from 13 countries, as authorities confirmed 5 new cases, bringing the total in the West African nation to 8. China has given the go-ahead for researchers to begin human safety tests of an experimental coronavirus vaccine in the race to develop a shot against the COVID-19 epidemic that has killed more than 7,000 people worldwide. A Chinese company has received regulatory approval to start human trials of a vaccine against the novel coronavirus. Progress is occurring at an unprecedented speed as the highly infectious pathogen that causes the COVID-19 virus looks unlikely to be stamped out through containment measures alone. As the outbreak spreads around the world, more than 100 clinical trials were launched in China to study the effectiveness of everything from anti-flu drugs and plasma containing antibodies from recovered patients to traditional Chinese herbal medicine. Meanwhile, a smaller number of trials have also been announced in countries including the US, South Korea and Thailand. However, experts at the World Health Organization have stressed that they do not expect any fully tested and approved vaccine to reach the market until the middle of next year. And for the second consecutive day, China's health authorities have reported just 1 new domestic case of COVID-19. Although a dozen imported infections were registered, China says it has essentially curbed the spread of the virus.
Overall, there are 8,056 diagnosed cases of the virus, including 2,622 acute cases. 69,601 patients have been cured and discharged from hospital. The number of deaths from the virus stands at 3,237. There are currently 8,894 confirmed cases and 119 suspected cases. As of March 15th, more than 180 museums in 19 provinces and autonomous regions, including Shanxi, Shanghai, and Sichuan, have opened their doors again.
And we have more stories coming up after this break, including on Joe Biden's victory in Florida, Illinois and Arizona. Don't go away. Welcome back. The chair of the Caribbean community, Mia Motley, said in a strongly worded statement that there are forces in Guyana that do not want to see a recount of the country's ballots following the March 2nd general and regional elections. Motley's comments came after the 5-member independent CARICOM high-level team withdrew its services on Tuesday following an injunction from the Guyanese High Court to block the vote recount. Later on Tuesday, Motley explained that CARICOM has been forced to withdraw the regional team. The Prime Minister of Barbados reiterated that the preservation of law and order is paramount and all parties must work hard to ensure that there is peace across Guyana. The injunction issued on Tuesday put a stop to the agreement reached previously between the incumbent president of Guyana and the leader of the opposition to hold a full recount of votes following continued complaints of electoral fraud.
With the representatives of the small parties, we met with
the Brazilian states of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro were hit by a wave of pot-banging protests on Tuesday to demand the resignation of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Hundreds of people shouted from their windows and balconies, "Bolsonaro out," as they hit pots and pans. The call for the protest was shared on social media and it represented a prelude to the demonstration scheduled for Wednesday against the far-right president, which was postponed due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Tuesday's protest took place a few hours after the country registered its first 2 coronavirus deaths. Meanwhile, Congressman for the Sustainability Network Party, Leandro Grass, presented the 10th request for Bolsonaro's impeachment before Congress for criminal responsibility that threatens the Constitution and the security of the country. Where's this come back again? Joe Biden swept to victory in the US states of Florida, Illinois and Arizona, which went ahead with Democratic presidential primaries on Tuesday, despite the fears over the coronavirus. Biden has now moved closer to securing the 1,991 delegates he needs to secure the Democratic nomination, with a current total of 1,153. Due to the coronavirus outbreak, Ohio, with 136 delegates, has indefinitely postponed its primary, although many in the state have already cast their ballots early or via absentee ballots. Florida and Arizona have robust early voting systems, which means any drop in the same-day balloting had less of an effect on total turnout than in Illinois. In Arizona, for instance, early voting exceeded the entire turnout in the state's 2016 Democratic primary, and the state was called for Biden just a few hours after polls closed.
It looks like once again, in Florida and Illinois, we're still awaiting to hear from Arizona. Our campaign has had a very good night. We've moved closer to securing the Democratic Party's nomination for president. And we're doing it by building a broad coalition that we need to win in November. Senator Sanders and I may disagree on tactics, but we share a common vision for the need to provide affordable health care for all Americans, reduce income inequity that has risen so drastically, to tackling the existential threat of our time, climate change. Senator Sanders and his supporters have brought a remarkable passion and tenacity to all of these issues.
And our correspondent in the United States, Jorge Gestoso, brings us a review of Tuesday's primary events, which appear to have further defined the likely Democratic candidate for the 2020 presidential elections.
President Trump could definitely see that Joe Biden is looking more and more that he's going to be his challenger. Joe Biden was talking from his home from Delaware because of all the situation of the coronavirus that people cannot get together. His message was very conciliatory with a lot of empathy, something that most definitely doesn't have Donald Trump. Was inviting the followers of Bernie Sanders to join them in order to beat Donald Trump. In the case of the state of Arizona, results are starting to come, but most definitely Joe Biden is the favorite according to the polls. Most definitely also the demographics was helping Joe Biden because of a lot of percentage in the case of Florida and in the case of Arizona of people of 65 years and older that are the ones who go more frequently to the polling places and are the more conservative. For Bernie Sanders, is a moment to regroup and see what he's going to do after this night that most definitely is putting Joe Biden very close to the nomination.
And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on Tuesday approving a nationwide vote on proposed constitutional amendments to be held on April 22nd. Currently, the Russian constitution prohibits a sitting president to serve more than 2 consecutive terms, but if the amendments receive public approval, Putin will be able to run for the presidency for a 3rd consecutive term. On March 16th, Russia's Constitutional Court approved the constitutional amendments after both chambers of the national parliament and all Russian regions backed the proposed bill. Final approval in the referendum will require the support of more than half of the country's voters. Putin also stressed on Tuesday that the referendum could be postponed, if so required, due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. The country, which has reported nearly 100 cases so far but no deaths, has taken measures to contain the spread of the COVID-19 virus, including a ban on the entry of most foreign nationals until at least May 1st. President of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, stressed on Wednesday that the country has faced the aggressions of its enemies, especially those from the United States, and has achieved economic growth despite the difficulties. Rouhani pointed out that while the US sanctions impacted on the economy, industry and the population, the country saw great achievements, registering economic growth without depending on oil production for the first time ever. The president also recalled his government's response to the novel coronavirus outbreak as soon as it was detected in the country. In a speech to his cabinet, Rouhani stressed the Iranian government moved quickly to close religious sites and mosques this week to help contain the spread of the virus. Iraqi President Barham Salih named the pro-Western lawmaker Adan al-Surfi as the next prime minister, tasked with ruling a country hit by military unrest, street protests and the novel coronavirus outbreak. The nomination came hours after 2 rockets hit an Iraqi military base hosting NATO and US-led coalition troops, the third such attack within a week. According to military officials, there were no casualties. Al-Surfi is the former governor of the Shiite holy city of Najaf. Al-Surfi is an Iraqi-US dual national who would have to announce his US citizenship to take up the post, which is yet to be confirmed by Parliament. President Barham Salih announced that he had nominated Surfi to replace outgoing Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi, who resigned in December amid Iraq's unprecedented wave of anti-government protests. Al-Surfi now has 30 days to pull together a government. This is the second nomination for Prime Minister in 45 days, since the previous candidate, Mohammed Tawfiq Alawi, withdrew his nomination on March 1st after failing to win a vote of confidence in Parliament. Malawi's President Peter Mutharika has sacked the country's military chief, General Vincent Nagundi. The move came just hours after the president refused to ratify changes to electoral laws which had been approved by Parliament and were meant to pave the way for fresh elections in May. Mutharika's re-election last year was overturned by the country's top court. Parliament set a new date and passed an electoral reform bill, which the president refused to sign, citing unconstitutionality. Protesters who took to the streets protesting the result of the polls last year reported enjoying the support and protection of the army. Major opposition voices also praised the role the army is playing in the protests. According to reports, in several instances when the police and protesters have clashed, the army has stepped in to restore order and calm and protected demonstrators. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.